A 26-year-old black woman in a white service shirt and a black apron storms across the marble floor of Milan's most dangerous private dining room, past two granite-faced enforcers who have made grown men weep, and points one trembling, righteous finger directly into the face of the most feared man in all of northern Italy. Not to beg, not to apologize, to collect. The envelope was the same as last month's. Valeria Laura turned it over twice, as if the act of flipping it might change what was printed inside. Payment deferred. See management, but the words stayed exactly as cruel as the first time she read them. She was standing in the narrow hallway outside her apartment on Via Torino, still wearing her woke uniform, the scent of expensive food still clinging to her apron, food she had served, food she would never afford. The hallway light flickered the way it always did, that same tired blink, like even the building had given up trying. 3 months. 3 months of deferred. 3 months of Mr. Conti's greasy smile and his hand wave and his "these things take time. Valeria, be patient." She pressed her back against the cold wall and did the math she already knew by heart. Rent, overdue by 40 days. Her mother's medication refill, still sitting uncollected at the pharmacy on Corso Buenos Aires because the pharmacist, God bless him, had already extended her credit twice and she could not look him in the eye a third time. The single working burner on her stove. The hole in her left work shoe she had been covering with a folded piece of cardboard since February. Be patient. She had been patient since she was 19 years old. When she arrived in this city with a scholarship, a single suitcase, and the unshakable belief that hard work was the one currency that could never be stolen from you. 7 years later, someone had found a way to steal that too. She pulled out her phone and opened the group chat. 22 restaurant staff, cleaners, kitchen potters, junior sovas, all of them with the same story. Amara, whose son needed new school shoes. Deng, who had been sleeping in the staff locker room because his landlord had already changed the locks. Precious, who had quietly stopped eating lunch to save money and hoped nobody noticed. Nobody had. Until now. Valeria pushed herself off the wall, folded the envelope with sharp, deliberate precision, and tucked it into her apron pocket like a weapon she intended to use. She had heard the whisper earlier in the kitchen, hushed voices and wide eyes, that he was dining in Section A tonight. Private table. No reservation name. Just the kind of silence around a booking that told you everything you needed to know. Stefano Bassi. Every person in Milan knew that name the way they knew to check for traffic before crossing the street. Instinctively, without thinking, because forgetting could kill you. He owned half the city's fine dining establishments, including the one she worked in. He was the man whose name nobody said above a murmur and whose gaze nobody held for longer than a second. The other servers had practically drawn straws to avoid Section A. Valeria had volunteered, not because she was fearless. Her hands were shaking even now, even in the empty hallway with no one watching. But because 22 people were counting on someone to stop being afraid first. She straightened her collar. She smoothed her apron. She looked at herself in the dark reflection of her phone screen. Sharp eyes, locked jaw, the face of a woman who had run out of options and discovered, at the very bottom of that emptiness, something harder than fury. She walked back toward the restaurant. The crystal chandeliers of Section A were already glowing gold in the distance, warm and beautiful and utterly indifferent. The light of a world that had never once looked down long enough to notice the people holding it up. Tonight, one of those people was going to make it look. Subscribe to see how this unfolds. And comment below telling me where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you personally, just to know how far our story has traveled. Chapter 1. The Empty Envelope. The envelope was the same as last month's. Valeria Laura turned it over twice, as if the act of flipping it might change what was printed inside. Payment deferred. See management, but the words stayed exactly as cruel as the first time she read them. She was standing in the narrow hallway outside her apartment on Via Torino, still in her woke uniform, the scent of expensive food clinging to her apron, food she had served all evening, food she would never afford. The hallway light flickered the way it always did, that same tired blink, like even the building had given up trying. 3 months. 3 months of deferred. 3 months of Mr. Conti's greasy smile and his hand wave and his "these things take time. Valeria, be patient." She was still doing the math she already knew by heart when the door at the end of the hallway swung open and her landlord, Mr. Ferrante, appeared in his undershirt and slippers, holding his own piece of paper like a torch at a burning. "I slid it under your door this morning," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. 40 days, Valeria. I am not a charity. I know. Her voice was steady. She had practiced that, the steadiness. I get paid this Friday. He looked at her the way people looked at forecasts they didn't believe. Then he went back inside and closed the door softly, and the click of that latch was somehow louder than a slam. She pulled out her phone and opened the group chat. 22 restaurant staff, cleaners, kitchen potters, junior servers, all of them with the same story stitched in different fabrics. Amara, whose son needed new school shoes and had been wearing ones 2 sizes too small for a month. Deng, who had quietly started sleeping in the staff locker room because his landlord had already changed the locks. Precious, who had stopped eating lunch to save money and smiled brightly whenever anyone asked if she was hungry. Just not that hungry today. Valeria scrolled through the messages, the pleas to Mr. Conti that had gone unanswered, the voice notes of people crying quietly so their children wouldn't hear, and she felt something move through her chest like a tide turning. She folded the envelope with sharp, deliberate precision and tucked it into her apron pocket. Tomorrow was another shift. And tomorrow, she decided, something was going to change. The change came sooner than tomorrow. It came the very next evening, in the form of a whisper pass between 2 kitchen potters near the cold storage unit, low and urgent the way whispers always were when his name was involved. Section A, private booking. No name on the reservation. Valeria was restocking the condiment trays when she heard it, and she didn't need them to finish the sentence. In this restaurant, a nameless booking in Section A meant only one thing. The other servers knew it too. She could see it in the way they suddenly became very interested in their assigned sections, in the way Precious developed a sudden, convenient problem with a table in Section C that needed her immediate attention. Stefano Bassi. She had seen him once before, 2 years ago, from a distance, seated at the same private table, surrounded by men who stood the way buildings stood, immovable and purposeful. She remembered thinking that he looked ordinary. That was the thing nobody told you about dangerous men. They didn't look like the stories. They looked like someone's quiet uncle, until the moment they didn't. The floor manager, a nervous little man named Ricky, was already sweating through his collar. "I need someone for Section A," he said to the group, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Experienced. Professional. Someone who understands." He searched for the word. Discretion. Silence pooled around him like water finding its level. Valeria raised her hand. Ricky looked at her the way a man looks at a fire alarm, relieved it exists, terrified of what its ringing means. "Valeria, I'm experienced. I'm professional." She was already untying and rettying her apron, crisp and deliberate. "And I understand more about discretion than anyone in this building." She walked toward Section A before he could argue. The truth was, her hands had started shaking the moment she volunteered. The truth was, she had been shaking since yesterday's envelope, since the click of Ferrante's latch, since Deng's locker room secret and Precious's missing lunches. But she had learned something important in 26 years, that shaking hands and a steady spine were not mutually exclusive. You could be terrified and still walk forward. You could be afraid and still be the one who moved first. She pushed through the gilded double doors of Section A. The room received her like a held breath. Crystal chandeliers poured warm gold over white tablecloths and red velvet chairs, over walls leafed in gold that caught the light and threw it back doubled. It was a beautiful room. It was the kind of beautiful that had never once been built for someone like her, not to enjoy, only to serve within. Stefano Bassi sat at the center table as though the room had been designed around him, which, in every practical sense, it had. Dark suit, perfectly knotted tie, hands loosely clasped on the white linen like a man who had nothing to prove because everything had already been proven. Two enforcers stood behind him, wide-shouldered, dark-suited, faces carved from the same expression. He was eating calmly. He did not look up when she entered. She crossed the room, set down the water service with hands that did not betray her, and began her approach the same way she always had, measured, professional, invisible. And then she felt the envelope in her apron pocket. She stopped. For 3 months, she had been invisible. For 3 months, 22 people had been invisible. For 3 months, Mr. Conti had been counting on all of them staying that way. She looked at Stefano Bassi, at the man whose name was on this building, whose empire included the payroll that had been quietly robbed, and she made a decision that her body understood before her mind fully caught up with it. She stepped forward. "Why won't you pay us?" The words left her mouth before the room had time to prepare for them, and the silence that followed was the kind that precedes catastrophe, total, airless, the held breath of a world about to change shape. Both enforcers moved immediately, stepping forward from behind the chair, their hands already reaching. But Valeria was already leaning in, her finger extended, pointing directly at Stefano Bassi's face with the whole weight of 3 months of deferred envelopes in Deng's locker room and Precious's empty stomach pressed behind it. 3 months, she said. And her voice was shaking, but it was loud, loud enough to bounce off the gold-leafed walls and come back at her doubled, loud enough that she surprised even herself. 3 months of deferred payments. 22 employees. People who showed up every single shift, every single day, and served this room. She gestured broadly, her arm sweeping the gilded space, and have not received one complete paycheck. The enforcers had closed to within 2 steps of her. Neither had touched her yet. She didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on Stefano Bassi. He had not moved. That was the thing that should have frightened her most, the absolute, geological stillness of him. Most people, when confronted, leaned back. He had not leaned back even a fraction. He sat exactly as she had found him, hands clasped, face unreadable, watching her with the focused attention of a man who encountered very few things that genuinely surprised him. She was, apparently, one of them. "My name is Valeria Laura," she said, and her voice dropped now, steadied. The shaking had moved somewhere deeper, somewhere below her words, and what came out was clear and direct. "I have worked in this restaurant for 4 years. I have never been late. I have never broken a plate, lost a reservation, or given a guest reason to complain. I have been a model employee by every possible measure." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the folded envelope, pressing it flat on the white tablecloth in front of him. And this is what 4 years of model employment looks like. "Payment deferred. See management." The word deferred sat between them on the white linen like something shameful. The larger of the 2 enforcers took the final step and closed his hand around her arm, not roughly, but with the firm finality of a door being shut. She didn't pull away. She held Stefano Bassi's gaze. And for the first time, something moved across his face. Not anger, not amusement, not the contemptuous dismissal she had braced for. Curiosity. Leave us. 2 words. Quiet as a closing drawer. The enforcer's hand released her arm immediately. She heard the shift of expensive fabric, the soft percussion of leather soles on marble, and then the gilded doors of Section A swung shut behind them with a sound like a vault ceiling. Valeria was alone with the most dangerous man in northern Italy. The chandeliers hummed faintly overhead. Somewhere distant, the kitchen produced its muffled sounds, the clatter and heat of a world that had no idea what was happening 15 meters away. Stefano Bassi looked at her for a long moment. Not the way powerful men usually looked at her, through her, past her, at the space she occupied rather than the person filling it. He looked at her, specifically, like she was a document he was reading carefully before signing anything. Then he gestured to the chair across from him. She did not sit. Something shifted in his expression. The faintest suggestion of a different kind of curiosity, the kind reserved for truly rare specimens. He unclasped his hands, turned over the defied envelope on the tablecloth, and read what was printed there without picking it up. "Sit down, Miss Laura," he said. His Italian was precise, unhurried. "You've already done the most dangerous thing you'll ever do in this room. The chair won't kill you." She sat today. He poured water into her empty glass, a gesture so unexpectedly civil that it briefly dismantled something in her chest, and then leaned back slightly, regarding her. "You pointed your finger at me," he said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation, delivered the way a scientist might note an unexpected result. "You employ me," she replied. "Technically, I pointed my finger at my employer. Technically." He seemed to taste the word. "And the 22 employees you mentioned, all have the same notice. Some for 3 months, one for 4. 4 months." He said it quietly, and something in his tone had changed, a slight tightening, barely perceptible, like a string being wound one turn tighter. "And you've raised this with management, Mr. Conti, 7 times across the 22 of us. In person, by email, by written requests submitted to the HR portal." She had the summary on her phone. She had prepared it, the same way she had prepared herself, with the knowledge that if this moment ever came, she would not waste it. "Each time we were told payments were under administrative review, we were never told what was being reviewed, by whom, or when the review would end." Stefano Bassi picked up the deferred envelope. He turned it once, slowly, the way she had turned it in her hallway, as though the act of turning it might change what was inside. Then he set it down. His expression was still composed, but something behind it had shifted in a way she couldn't fully name. "Who else knows you're here?" he asked. "No one. This was my decision. And if my men had not let you speak, if I had simply had you removed." She met his eyes. "Then I would have written it down, sent it to every labor regulatory body in the city, made enough noise that the noise itself became the story." She paused. "I'm not asking for a favor, Mr. Bassi. I'm asking for wages that were already earned. Those are different things." The room was very quiet. Stefano Bassi looked at her for a long time, long enough that the silence became its own kind of conversation, layered and specific. Then he said, "Tell me about Conti." She told him, not the emotional version, not the one that lived in her chest alongside Precious's empty lunches and Deng's locker room exile. She gave him the documented version, clean and sequenced, dates, amounts, names, the HR portal submission numbers she had recorded in a notes app on her phone, the pattern of deferrals that had begun. She realized now as she laid it all out chronologically, approximately 6 months after a particular staffing restructure that had placed Mr. Conti in sole oversight of payroll processing for non-senior staff. She watched Stefano Bassi's face as she spoke. It was like watching weather move across a landscape, still from a distance. Deeply active if you were paying close enough attention. The restructure, he said, stopping her. The one in November. Yes. That restructure was designed to streamline payroll oversight, to reduce processing delays. His voice was measured, each word placed carefully, the way a person speaks when they are managing something large and internal that they do not intend to display. It was designed to ensure workers were paid more efficiently. Valeria looked at him. She had assumed many things about this conversation before she walked through those gilded doors. She had assumed denial. She had assumed indifference. She had assumed the practiced deflection of a man accustomed to insulating himself from consequences with layers of subordinates and lawyers and silence. She had not assumed this. She had not assumed that the look on Stefano Barsi's face would be the look of a man receiving information he had never been given. You didn't know, she said. It came out quieter than she intended, not an accusation, barely even a question. More like the moment a picture comes into focus and you understand, all at once, what you're actually looking at. He didn't answer immediately. He picked up the deferred envelope again, and this time he held it differently, not like a document, but like evidence. The November restructure, he said, consolidated payroll processing for junior staff under a single oversight manager. A pause. Under Conti. Yes. And the deferrals began. December, first week. She had the date on her phone. She didn't need to check it. Initially 1 or 2 staff members. By February, 11. By last month, 22. A controlled escalation, he said, almost to himself. His voice was very quiet now. The stillness of him had changed quality. Before, it had been the stillness of a man conserving power he didn't need to spend. Now it was the stillness of something being very precisely, very deliberately contained. The amounts being withheld. She continued carefully, watching him, reading the room the way she had learned to read every room she had ever worked in. Across 22 employees, over the full period, I've calculated approximately €64,000. Something moved through Stefano Barsi's expression that she could not name. It was not surprise at the number. She had the sense that €64,000 was not, to this man, a number designed to shock. It was something more specific, something colder. Conti has been with this organization for 9 years, he said. I know. She held his gaze, which is perhaps why he believed it would work. The chandeliers hummed. The distant kitchen clattered on, indifferent and warm. Stefano Barsi set the envelope down for the last time, smoothed it flat against the white tablecloth with 2 fingers, and was quiet for a moment that felt architecturally significant, like the pause before a structure shifts. You walked into this room to confront me, he said finally, a woman who had every reason to believe it would end badly for her. I had 22 reasons, she said. That was enough. He looked at her then with something she had not seen in his expression at any point in the previous 30 minutes. Not curiosity, not calculation, not the cold professional appraisal of a man measuring a variable. Something almost like recognition. Miss Laura, he said, and he reached into his jacket, produced a phone, and placed it on the table between them. Before I make a call that will have significant consequences for a number of people, I need you to tell me everything you know about Conti's operation. Every detail, every name, every date. He slid the phone slightly toward her. And then, he said, I need you to trust me. Valeria looked at the phone. She looked at the man across the table, at the composed, dangerous, quietly furious face of someone who had just discovered that the corruption he was known for inspiring in others had, without his knowledge, been turned inward, aimed at the people beneath him, stolen in his name. She thought about Deng's locker room, Precious's empty lunches, 22 defarred envelopes folded and tucked into 22 pockets like wounds people carried quietly to work every day. She picked up the phone. "You first," she said. "Subscribe to see how this unfolds. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you personally, just to know how far our story has traveled." She never got to finish the sentence. The first sound was glass, not the delicate collapse of a single dropped thing, but the simultaneous implosion of every window along the east wall of Section A percussive wave of shattering that seemed to arrive before its own cause, the way lightning precedes thunder. The chandeliers swung violently overhead, their crystal drops singing against each other in a high, panicked chorus. Stefano was out of his chair before the second sound arrived. The second sound was gunfire. He moved with a speed that contradicted everything about the way he had been sitting, the loosely clasped hands, the geological stillness, the performance of a man who never needed to hurry. He crossed the distance between their chairs in 2 strides, caught her arm with a grip that was firm but not rough, and pulled her down below the table line as the third and fourth shots punched through the gilded double doors. "Stay low," he said, and his voice had changed completely. All the measured cadence was gone, replaced by something clipped and precise, a language of pure function. "Move when I move. Stop when I stop." "What is?" "Move." She moved. They crossed the room in a crouch, using the overturned tables as cover, Stefano navigating the space with the familiarity of a man who had, at some point in his life, made a practice of knowing every exit in every room he entered. Behind them, the gilded doors burst open and 2 figures in dark clothing swept through, their movements coordinated and professional. Not opportunistic thieves. Not frightened amateurs. Professionals. Sent specifically. Tonight. Stefano pulled her through a service door she had used 100 times, carrying bread baskets and sparkling water, and suddenly they were in the back corridor, fluorescent lit, unglamorous, the honest skeleton of the beautiful room they'd just fled. He pressed her back against the wall, glanced both directions, then looked at her with an expression that contained no room for anything except the immediate present. "There's a car in the rear delivery bay," he said. "Gray. The driver's name is Luca. When we reach that car, you get in and you do not get out until I tell you to. Do you understand?" "Who are they?" she said. His jaw tightened. "Someone who found out about a phone call that hasn't been made yet. Conti." The word arrived in her mind with the weight of a stone dropped in still water. Conti had known, had anticipated exactly this, that one day someone would reach high enough to find the ceiling of his corruption, and he had made arrangements for that day. 22 deferred envelopes, and beneath them, something far uglier than stolen wages. "Run," Stefano said. She ran. The delivery bay was cold and smelled of diesel and kitchen waste, and the gray car was exactly where he said it would be, engine already idling, Luca already turning to look at them with the expression of a man who had been waiting for something like this for years and was nevertheless not happy to see it arrive. They piled into the back seat, and the car was moving before the doors had fully closed, rolling out into the Milan night with a quietness that felt engineered. Behind them, the warm gold light of the restaurant's upper windows was interrupted, once, by a flash that had nothing to do with chandeliers. Valeria watched it until it disappeared behind a corner. She was still holding Stefano's phone. The estate was 40 minutes outside the city, behind a gate that opened without Luca touching anything, at the end of a road that didn't appear on any map she had ever consulted. It was not what she had expected, not the ostentatious fortress of a man-performing power, but something older and quieter. Stone walls, climbing vines, the kind of building that had existed long before its current owner and would exist long after, indifferent to the human dramas conducted within it. Inside, it smelled of old books and coffee and wood smoke. A woman in her 60s, small, sharp-eyed, wearing an apron that was genuinely functional rather than decorative, appeared from a corridor, assessed the situation in approximately 1 second, and disappeared again without a word. She returned with a tray, coffee, bread, a folded cloth for the cut on Valeria's hand that she hadn't noticed until this moment. Stefano sat across from her at a kitchen table that was nothing like the white linen surface of Section A. This table was wan and large and marked with the history of 1,000 ordinary meals. He had removed his jacket. His tie was loosened. Without the architecture of the suit's formality, he looked different, not smaller, but more specific. Less like a category and more like a person. He wrapped his hands around a coffee cup. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who would run." He said it simply, without flattery. Most people, when the windows break, run in the direction of a way. You ran in the direction I told you. He paused. That requires a particular kind of trust. "I didn't trust you," she said honestly. "I trusted that you wanted to survive, and that surviving required the same direction for both of us." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face and disappeared. "Conti didn't act alone," he said then, setting down the cup, returning to the business of the present. "The attack was coordinated. That requires resources he doesn't have independently." He looked at her. "He has a partner, a rival family that has been looking for leverage against me for 3 years. Conti gave it to them. Access, information, the kind of internal evidence that makes a man vulnerable." He paused. The wage theft wasn't purely greed. It was also a test, a proof of concept, evidence that my organization had a corruption problem I wasn't aware of. Valeria absorbed this. They were going to use it against you. Expose it selectively, at the right moment, in the right rooms. He nodded once. The €64,000 was the down payment on something worth considerably more. She thought about 22 people who had no idea their suffering had been engineered as a political instrument, who had carried their deferred envelopes home and done quiet math about school shoes and medication refills while 2 men in suits used their stolen wages as a chess piece. The fury she had walked into Section A with, the clean, righteous fury of a woman demanding what was owed, underwent a quiet transformation. It didn't diminish. It deepened. It became something more specific and more dangerous. "What do we do?" she said. Stefano looked at her across the worn kitchen table for a moment. "Then, we set a trap. It was Luca who found it. Or rather, who brought the folder that contained it, sliding it across the kitchen table at 2 in the morning while the wood smoke smell deepened and the woman in the functional apron refilled cups without being asked. Stefano had ordered a background check on Valeria the moment they arrived. Not from suspicion, he explained, but from the habit of a man who had survived as long as he had by understanding the precise nature of every person in any room he occupied. He opened the folder, read it, closed it. Then he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, and she had, in the span of one evening, seen several of his expressions. This one was new, unguarded, the face of a man encountering something he had not prepared a response for. "Your father," he said carefully. "His name was Emmanuel Laura." She stilled. "Yes. He worked construction, contracted labor. He died 11 years ago, on a building site." Her voice was level. She had said the facts of it many times. The facts were the manageable part. Structural failure. The contractor was cutting costs on materials. "My father and 2 other men." She stopped. Stefano was quiet for a moment. The building site was on Via Manzoni. She looked up. "I was 23 years old," he said, and his voice had changed again, not to the clipped functional register of the escape, not to the precise cadence of strategic conversation, but to something older and slower, the voice of a memory being handled carefully. I had just taken over from my father. The Via Manzoni development was one of our contracted projects. He paused. I didn't know about the materials substitution until after. The site manager acted independently. I terminated him and paid full compensation to the families of the two men who— He stopped, looked at the folder. There were 3 men. The third family was missed, Valeria said quietly. She had known this for 11 years. We were contacted initially, and then the correspondence stopped. Our file was lost in a restructure. The word restructure fell between them with a particular weight. Stefano Bassi, the most feared man in northern Italy, looked at the folder in front of him, then at the woman across the table, and said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was measured but not composed. The distinction mattered. I owe your family a debt, he said. One that was obscured by the same kind of internal negligence that obscured Conti's theft. And I am— He paused on the word as though testing its weight. I am sorry. Valeria looked at him, at the man behind the monster, the way she had not allowed herself to see it until now, a man in his 30s who had inherited a kingdom and its crimes, who was surrounded by people whose loyalty was conditional and whose honesty was optional, who had been sitting in a gilded room being served by people he had never once been allowed to truly see. She thought of her father, of his voice, of the particular way he had said her name, like it meant something important. She said, Then help me make sure it never happens to anyone else. The trap took 4 days to build and 11 minutes to spring. Stefano's people identified Conti's partner in the rival family, a man named Russo, careful and ambitious, who had been channeling information outward through a secondary payroll account that Conti had established under a subsidiary name. The account had been invisible to Stefano's senior financial team because it had been constructed to look exactly like a legitimate administrative holding line, the kind of technical camouflage that required both inside knowledge and external guidance to execute. Conti had the inside knowledge. Russo had provided the guidance. The trap was elegant in the way the best traps are. It used the enemy's own architecture against them. Stefano let it be known, through carefully managed channels, that an internal audit was being conducted and that Conti had been identified as a witness rather than a subject. Safe, protected, useful. Conti, believing himself several steps ahead, made the call to Russo. Russo, believing Stefano was occupied managing an internal scandal, dispatched 2 men to intercept the audit and eliminate the primary witness, which was meant to be Valeria, the employee whose complaint had initiated the review. They had underestimated several things. They had underestimated that the audit location, a conference room in the Bassi Group's secondary offices on Corso Venezia, had been selected specifically for its controllability. They had underestimated that Luca and 3 other men had been in the building since 6 in the morning, and they had profoundly, fatally underestimated Valeria Laura, who was not hiding in a safe house as Russo's intelligence suggested, but was seated at the conference table with a laptop, a fully documented evidence file spanning 4 months of wage theft, and the kind of expression that came from being a woman who had already done the most dangerous thing she would ever do and survived it. When Conti walked into the conference room and found her there, alone, apparently, seated calmly with a coffee and a stack of printed bank statements, the color left his face in a single, clean motion. Valeria, he said, and the way he said it told her everything about how he had always thought of her as a variable, a manageable inconvenience, a name on a deferred payment notice. Sit down, Mr. Conti, she said. We have some accounts to settle. He ran. He made it to the corridor before Luca's team closed the exits with the quiet efficiency of people who had been waiting patiently for exactly this. Russo's men arrived 8 minutes later to find the building sealed, Conti in zip ties in the stairwell, and Stefano Bassi standing in the lobby with the kind of stillness that preceded the end of things. It was over before it had fully begun. The evidence file Valeria had assembled, cross-referenced, time-stamped, forensically organized across her notes app in 3 weeks of quiet, careful documentation, was handed to 2 separate law enforcement contacts within the hour. Not because Stefano was a man who trusted institutions, but because Valeria had made clear in the safe house kitchen at 2 in the morning that whatever came next would be built on accountability rather than buried in it. He had agreed without argument. That, she thought afterward, had surprised her most. The 22 employees received their full outstanding wages, every deferred euro, with interest, transferred directly within 48 hours. No administrative review, no management discretion, no envelope. Amara's son got his school shoes. Deng went home. Precious ate lunch. The office was on the 4th floor of the Bassi Group's main building, with a window that looked out over the city, not the gilded private view of Section A's chandeliers, but the actual city, wide and complicated and indifferent in the way that cities are, full of people doing the quiet arithmetic of survival. Valeria stood at that window for a long time on her first morning. The desk behind her was real and solid, the kind of desk that accumulated history. Already there were files on it, a laptop, a printed organizational chart with her name at the top of a new column, Bassi Legacy Fund, Director. The fund had been Stefano's suggestion and her architecture, built over 2 weeks of kitchen table conversations that had moved from survival to strategy to something that felt, tentatively, like purpose. Its mandate was specific: independent wage oversight for every contracted and employed worker within the Bassi Group's operational reach. External audits. A direct reporting line that bypassed every layer of management between a worker and accountability. A legal team whose retainer was paid by the fund, not the organization it was auditing. A system designed so that no one could do to someone else's father what had been done to hers. The door opened behind her and Stefano entered. No jacket today, sleeves rolled, carrying 2 coffees the way he had adopted the habit since the safe house kitchen, where the woman with the functional apron had quietly modeled the radical idea that powerful men could also carry their own cups. He set one on her desk. The board approved the fund's first independent audit slate this morning, he said. I know. Luca sent me the minutes. She turned from the window. 3 of the subsidiary contractors flagged immediately. I know. He looked at her with the same specific attention he had given her across the white tablecloth in Section A, but it had changed shape over the past weeks, as attention does when it is built on something real. You were right, the first night, about the restructure, about what it had enabled. He paused. The organization I thought I was running and the organization that actually existed were not the same thing. That's what happens, she said, when the people who do the work are invisible to the people who own it. He nodded once. No argument. He had stopped arguing with her, she had noticed, approximately 48 hours into their acquaintance, not from deference, but from the particular respect of a person who had encountered someone whose clarity of vision exceeded the comfort of easy agreement. She picked up her coffee, looked at the organizational chart, at her name at the top of a column that hadn't existed a month ago. She thought of the hallway on Via Torino, the flickering light. The envelope turned twice in her hands, as though turning it might change what was printed inside. She thought of her father's voice saying her name like it meant something important. It did. It had always meant something important. She had simply been waiting, not for permission, not for rescue, but for the moment when staying quiet cost more than speaking. For the moment when the shaking hands and the steady spine and the folded envelope in the apron pocket became the most dangerous combination in any gilded room. That moment had arrived. She had walked through it, and on the other side, 22 people ate lunch, went home, and slept without doing arithmetic in the dark. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. She sat down at her desk, opened the first file, and began. And that is where we leave Valeria Laura, not at the end of a story, but at the beginning of a different one. If this story moved you, challenged you, or kept you reading past your bedtime, hit that subscribe button, because the deeper chapters of this world are coming and you do not want to arrive late. Drop a comment and tell me exactly where in the world you're watching from, your city, your country, your corner of this earth. I personally read every single one, and I will love to say hello to you, because the fact that our story found you wherever you are is something worth acknowledging. We're just getting started. See you in the next one.